At Christmas dinner, my dad looked straight at me and said, "You're not getting a dime of my inheritance." The room froze. The mashed potatoes were steaming, the fire crackled in the corner, and he chose that exact moment to humiliate me in front of everyone I love. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I sat there staring at him, my fork halfway to my mouth, the gravy cooling on my plate. My mom, Elaine, pressed her napkin into her lap, her face tight like she had known this was coming. My brother, Mark, smirked into his glass, pretending not to enjoy the show. Jessica, my younger sister, leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms, waiting for my reaction like she was at a theater. Dad didn't stop there. He leaned forward, his voice sharp enough to cut through the soft clinking of silverware. "Why would I leave anything to you, Melissa? You've always been a waste of money. Mark worked hard to become a lawyer. Jessica is building her own life. But you? What have you ever done except disappoint me?" The words hung in the air like smoke. The smell of roasted ham and cinnamon candles couldn't cover the bitterness that filled my throat. I tried to swallow it down, tried to keep my face blank, but something inside me cracked. My hands shook in my lap as I squeezed the fabric of my dress. I looked at my mother, hoping she'd say something, anything, to soften the blow. She only kept her eyes on her plate, pretending to rearrange her vegetable. Mark cleared his throat, barely hiding a laugh. Jessica's lips curled into a smile, the kind of smile you give when your rival finally stumbles. The fire popped in the background. The Christmas lights on the tree blinked cheerfully, mocking the heaviness that pressed down on me. Everyone else had gone back to eating, as if my father's words were just another part of the meal. But for me, it was different. It was the moment I realized the truth wasn't going to change. I sat there with the taste of cranberry sauce still in my mouth, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like part of that family. Something inside me hardened, and though I kept quiet, I knew nothing would ever be the same again. When I think back to my 20s, it almost feels like someone else's life. While most of my friends were chasing careers, moving to new cities, or going back to school, I was stuck working 2 jobs just to keep my family afloat. Dad had lost his job back then, and the bills kept piling up. The mortgage was months behind, the bank was calling every week, and the house we grew up in was hanging by a thread. I couldn't stand the thought of my parents losing it, so I picked up every shift I could, mornings at the diner and nights at the grocery store. I remember coming home after 12-hour days, my clothes smelling like grease and stale bread, my hands raw from stocking boxes. Dad would be sitting at the table, shaking his head at the stack of bills. Mom would rub his shoulders while I slipped my paycheck into the pile without a word. I told myself it was temporary, that things would get better. At the same time, Mark was finishing law school. His tuition wasn't cheap, but somehow that became another weight I carried. Whenever the family came up short, I was the one who chipped in. Books, rent, extra expenses. I covered more than I should have. Jessica was younger, and while I was working weekend, she was out with friends, driving the car I helped her pay for. I didn't complain. I told myself this was what family did. I believed Dad when he'd pat my shoulder and say, "Don't worry, Melissa. One day, you'll be rewarded for everything you've done." Those words kept me moving when I wanted to give up, when the exhaustion felt like it was going to break me. But the truth was, nothing changed. I put my dreams on hold, turned down opportunities that might have led me somewhere better, and stayed behind to make sure everyone else was taken care of. Years passed, and while Mark wore suits to his new job and Jessica bragged about her comfortable life, I was still in the shadows, working harder than anyone noticed. What I got in return wasn't gratitude, it was scorn. My father looked at me like I was nothing, like all those sacrifices had never happened. Every promise he made, every kind word about my future, turned out to be empty. And by the time I realized it, I had already given him more of my life than he ever deserved. That night, long after the plates had been cleared and the fire had gone cold, I lay awake in my old bedroom. The walls were thin in that house, thinner than my family ever seemed to realize. Voices carried easily through the hall, and I could hear my brother and sister talking in the kitchen. At first, I thought they were just cleaning up, maybe grabbing a late-night snack, but then I caught my own name. Mark's laugh was the first thing I heard. It was low and sharp, the kind of laugh he used when he thought he was smarter than everyone else. "Well, at least Dad finally said it out loud," he chuckled. "He should have cut her off years ago." Jessica's voice followed, smug and sweet like honey turned sour. "Honestly, she's basically the family servant, always running around doing favors, paying bills, covering for everyone else. She was never going to get anything." I froze, holding my breath, waiting for someone to stop her. But no one did. Mom was there too. I could hear her setting down a glass on the counter. For a second, I prayed she'd say something, maybe tell them to shut their mouths, to remind them of everything I had done. But she didn't. She just let the silence sit heavy, as if their words weren't cruel enough to deserve an answer. Lying there listening, my stomach twisted. I realized they didn't see me as a sister, not even as a daughter. To them, I was just useful. The one who filled the gaps, who worked when times were bad, who gave up what I wanted so they could have what they needed. And now that Dad had made his decision clear, they didn't even bother hiding their relief. It was like they'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for permission to say out loud what they had always thought, that I didn't matter. I wasn't part of their future, not part of their plans. I was just the backup they leaned on when life got hard, and now I had no place left at all. The laughter drifted down the hallway, mean and careless. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, staring at the ceiling in the dark. That was the moment I stopped lying to myself. Whatever bond one thought I had with them, whatever love I believed held us together, it had never really been there. They thought I was stuck, but the truth was very different. While they laughed at me and treated me like I was nothing, I was building something they couldn't even imagine. I kept it quiet, not because I was ashamed, but because I learned a long time ago that in my family, the more you showed, the more they took. It started small. Late nights after work, when everyone else was asleep, I sat at my desk with my laptop, sketching out ideas. I had always been interested in health and technology, the way simple tools could change people's lives. So I took a risk. I built a wellness app with a small team of freelancers I could barely afford at first. I handled the customer emails myself, stayed up answering questions, and kept pushing, even when it felt impossible. At the same time, I was still helping at home. If Dad needed money for bills, I sent it. If Mom said Jessica was short on rent, I chipped in. I played the role of the struggling daughter while, behind the scenes, my company grew slowly but steadily. Every extra dollar I made went back into the business. I didn't buy fancy clothes or a new car. I lived simply, kept my head down, and let them all think I was barely getting by. What they never saw were the milestones. The first contract with a big company. The day we hit 100,000 users. The investors who started calling me, wanting in. I celebrated those wins quietly, sometimes with nothing more than a smile to myself in the dark. Years passed, and while my father measured worth by who drove the nicest car or who had the loudest success story, I built my empire in silence. The company expanded into tech solutions for businesses, and soon it wasn't just a side project, it was a force. I had teams in multiple cities, partnerships I once only dreamed about, and profits that kept climbing higher every year. By the time anyone might have guessed, it was already too late. The numbers were staggering, tens of millions. More money than my father had saved in his lifetime. More than his estate could ever be worth. And still I kept quiet. To them, I was the failure. To the world, I was quickly becoming something else entirely. The summer heat pressed down heavy, the kind that made the air feel thick and sticky. We were all gathered in the backyard for a cookout, the kind of family tradition that used to mean something to me. The smell of burgers on the grill mixed with the sweetness of corn on the cob, and kids from the neighborhood laughed as they ran through sprinklers across the street. Everything looked cheerful on the outside, but inside, I was bracing myself. Dad was at the grill, spatula in hand, playing his role as the man in charge. He always liked to hold court at these gatherings, talking too loud, making jokes at everyone's expense. And, as usual, I became his target. He flipped a burger onto the plate, and without even looking at me, said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You know, Melissa's the only one here who still hasn't figured out what to do with her life. At this rate, maybe she'll make a career out of hanging around the family table." Laughter rippled through the yard. Mark shook his head like he'd heard the joke 100 times before. Jessica leaned back in her chair, sipping her drink with a grin that made my skin crawl. She tilted her head, eyes sparkling with cruelty, and said, "Seriously, Mel, do you ever plan to do something? Or are you just going to drift forever?" The words hit me like stones, not because they were new, but because of how casual they were. To them, I wasn't even a person anymore. I was a punchline. Their laughter wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut deep. I didn't answer. I kept my eyes on my plate, cutting into my corn as if their voices were just background noise. On the surface, I looked calm, maybe even numb. Inside, though, something was shifting. It wasn't the raw hurt I used to feel. It wasn't the desperate urge to defend myself or beg for recognition. It was colder, steadier. I looked around the table, at the faces of the people who were supposed to love me. My father, puffed up with pride over nothing more than putting food on a grill. My sister, smirking at the chance to kick me while I was down. My brother, too comfortable in his silence to ever lift a hand for me. And my mother, her eyes downcast, never once meeting mine. In that moment, I understood something clearly. Nothing I could ever do, no sacrifice I had made, no words I could say would change their view of me. I would always be their failure, because that's the role they decided I had to play. So I let them laugh. I let the conversation drift away from me, as if I was invisible. But deep down, I knew the truth. The day was coming when they wouldn't be laughing anymore. The day of reckoning was already on its way, and I was the only one who knew it. Months passed, and the summer heat gave way to cooler days. Life went on quietly, at least on the surface. My family carried on as if nothing had ever been said, still treating me like I was nothing more than a shadow in the room. What they didn't know was that outside of their small world, mine was getting bigger every day. One morning, everything changed. My face, smiling and confident, was on the cover of Forbes magazine. The headline called my company one of the fastest-growing women-led businesses in America. Inside, there was a full article about the work I had done, the risks I had taken, and the success that had followed. For years I had stayed in the background, but now there was no hiding. Richard, my father, found out the way I always imagined he would, by accident. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his mug of coffee, probably expecting a quiet morning, when his eyes landed on the magazine. My picture was there, bold and impossible to miss. For a moment, he didn't move. The coffee sloshed against the rim of his cup as his hand shook. He read my name once, then again, as if saying it twice might make it disappear. But it didn't. There it was, printed for the entire country to see. Melissa, the so-called failure, on the Forbes top entrepreneurs list. The kitchen fell silent, except for the ticking clock. He set the mug down too fast, spilling coffee across the table. His face went pale, and he looked like someone had knocked the wind out of him. All the times he had mocked me, all the years he had dismissed me, none of it matched the reality staring back at him. Without wasting another second, he grabbed his phone. His voice boomed through the house as he called for everyone to come together. Family meeting. Now! His tone carried a mix of urgency and disbelief, like he was holding onto a rope that was slipping from his hand. Jessica and Mark came into the room, confused by the sudden command. Mom followed slowly, drying her hands on a dish towel. Dad slapped the magazine onto the table, so hard it slid halfway across. My face stared up at them from the glossy cover. No one spoke at first. The only sound was the rustle of the pages as Dad shoved it toward them. Their eyes widened, their mouths parted. The failure they laughed at, the servant they mocked, was suddenly standing taller than all of them. At the meeting, everyone was quiet at first. Then Dad looked at me and called me the pride of the family. His voice was calm, almost proud, but it made me feel uneasy. I kept my eyes on him, not sure how to react. I remembered all the times I had been ignored or dismissed, and hearing him say that now felt strange. Mark leaned forward and said he always believed in me. His tone was casual, like he had always supported me, even though I remembered otherwise. I tried to read his expression, searching for sincerity, but all I could see was the way he avoided meeting my eyes fully. Still, I didn't answer. I just nodded slightly, keeping my feelings to myself. Jessica joined in quickly, smiling too much. She said we were best friends and laughed lightly, as if that would make everything okay. I noticed the nervous tension behind her words. I had never felt close to Jessica like that, and the sudden friendliness felt forced. My hands clenched in my lap, but I stayed silent. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Mom spoke next. She said the things she had said at Christmas dinner were just a joke. I remembered every word and the way it had stung. Mom's voice tried to sound light, like it was all nothing, but I felt the weight of it again. I stayed quiet, listening but not letting myself get drawn into an argument. The room felt heavy, and I could feel everyone watching me, waiting for some response. Then Dad leaned forward a little, his voice firm. He said inheritance didn't matter anymore. He explained that it didn't matter because I could now take care of everyone. His words were meant to sound generous, but I could feel the underlying pressure. It wasn't really about sharing or fairness. It was about control and expectation. I could see the hope in their eyes, the way they suddenly needed me. I sat quietly. Inside, anger simmered. I thought about all the times they had dismissed me, all the times they had made me feel less than they. Now, suddenly they were begging. It felt unfair and strange. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to encourage them or show how much I noticed the change in their behavior. The silence in the room seemed louder than any words could be. Even as they spoke, my mind ran through memories of past arguments, small comments, and ignored moments. Their sudden attention, their flattering words, felt like a mask over the truth I knew. I stayed calm on the outside, my face smooth and unreadable, but inside, the storm of feelings didn't stop. I understood the weight of what they were saying, and I knew I had the power to decide what to do next. No one spoke for a moment. Everyone waited for me to respond, but I simply listened. I didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't smile. I just let them talk and tried to measure what this change really meant. I finally spoke, my voice steady even though my chest felt tight. I reminded them of the Christmas dinner, of every cruel word, every little insult that had piled up over the years. I told them about the promises they had made and broken, about the times I had trusted them and been disappointed. Each memory came out clearly, one by one, like I was untangling a long, painful knot. I looked at Dad as I spoke. I remembered how he had ignored me, how he had pretended my feelings didn't matter. I remembered how he had tried to control everything, even now, with his talk of inheritance and responsibility. I told him exactly how it felt to be dismissed, to be pushed aside while they pretended I wasn't there. His face grew red as I spoke, and I could see the shame in his eyes, but it didn't make me stop. I turned to Mark. I reminded him that his so-called support had always been empty words. I reminded him of the times he had claimed to believe in me, but acted in ways that proved otherwise. He shifted in his seat, uncomfortable, and I didn't soften my words. I had waited too long to be polite. Jessica stared at me as I spoke, her smile gone, replaced by disbelief. I told her how her fake friendliness and sudden need for me now felt hollow. She had pretended to be close, to be a friend, but I remembered every time she had ignored me or sided with them against me. I could see her regret, but I didn't care about it. I looked at Mom and reminded her of the jokes she had made at Christmas, the words that had cut me deep. I told her that words could hurt more than silence, and that pretending it had been a joke didn't erase the pain. I spoke calmly, but each word was heavy, full of all the hurt I had carried for years. Then I said the words I had been holding back. I don't need your inheritance, I told them, and you'll never see a cent of mine. The room went completely silent. The sound of my own heartbeat seemed loud in my ear. Dad's face burned red, and he didn't know what to say. Jessica's eyes widened, and she couldn't hide her shock. Even Mom looked like she had been struck. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of their surprise and guilt around me. I didn't speak again. I just walked toward the door, each step deliberate. Their eyes followed me, but I didn't look back. I didn't need their approval, their apologies, or their pity. As I opened the door and left, I could feel the shock in the room behind me. They were frozen, stunned into silence, unable to move or speak. I walked away, feeling a strange mix of relief and strength. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. I didn't belong to their expectations or their manipulations anymore. I had finally said what I needed to say, and I left knowing I had taken back my power. After I left, my phone started ringing nonstop. Richard called over and over, his voice shaky and desperate. He kept begging me to talk, to explain, to forgive. I listened to a few messages, feeling the old anger bubble up again, and then I decided I had had enough. I blocked his number. Mark didn't call, but he sent message after message. He wrote about how family should stick together, how I couldn't just walk away. I read them, one by one, feeling their weight, and then I blocked him too. I didn't want to argue or justify myself. I knew my choice was right, and no amount of pressure would change that. Jessica tried a different approach. She messaged me in a soft, pleading tone, trying to make me feel guilty. She said I owed them, as if my life, my feelings, and my boundaries didn't matter. I read her words, felt a brief flicker of doubt, but quickly realized she was only trying to manipulate me. I blocked her too, without a second thought. Once the calls and messages stopped reaching me, I felt a strange calm. I poured myself into my work, focusing on the company I had built with my own hands. The projects, the deadlines, and the small victories gave me energy and a sense of purpose. Every task reminded me that I was capable and independent. I also spent more time with my friends, the ones who had always been there for me. We laughed, talked late into the night, and supported each other in ways my family never had. Their care felt real and steady, not dependent on guilt or expectation. Slowly, I focused on the people who truly valued me. I realized I didn't need empty words or forced apologies to feel important. I had built a life full of respect, trust, and genuine connection. My anger and hurt didn't disappear immediately, but I felt stronger each day, more certain of my decision. Blocking them wasn't just about cutting people off. It was about protecting myself, setting boundaries, and choosing the life I deserved. I finally understood that I didn't owe anyone anything, except to myself. With that clarity, I could move forward free from their control and focus on what really mattered, my happiness, my work, and the people who truly cared. The following Christmas, I decided to host my own dinner. This time, the house was filled with people who genuinely cared about me, my friends, mentors, and those I considered my chosen family. The air was warm with laughter and conversation, and I felt a calm happiness that I had never experienced with my biological family. I sat at the head of the table, a sense of pride settling over me. The Christmas lights twinkled softly, casting a warm glow over everyone. I carved the turkey slowly, enjoying the simple joy of being surrounded by people who respected and valued me. I noticed how everyone smiled, how the room felt full of trust and love. There was no tension, no need to hide my feelings, just the quiet comfort of belonging. As I looked around the table, my mind wandered briefly to last year. I remembered the betrayal, the insults, and the endless manipulation. I remembered the anger and the hurt that had burned inside me. For a moment, the memories felt sharp, but they no longer controlled me. Instead, they reminded me of how far I had come, how I had taken control of my own. A small, satisfied smile spread across my face. I realized that the life I had built, full of real connections, respect, and success, was more powerful than anything they could have offered. My happiness was no longer dependent on their approval, their praise, or even their recognition. I was free, finally free from their expectations and their game. The greatest feeling wasn't the money I had earned or the success I had achieved. It was knowing that the people who once dismissed me could now see me thriving, leading a life they could never imagine for themselves. My family had tried to push me down, to control me, to take from me, but I had risen above it all. This Christmas, surrounded by laughter and warmth, I understood that true revenge didn't need anger or cruelty. It was the quiet triumph of living well, of being fully myself, and of showing, without a single word, that I had built a life far richer than they ever dreamed. For the first time, I felt the peace of victory, the satisfaction of freedom, and the joy of finally belonging in the life I had chosen with the people who truly loved me. Would you have walked away like Melissa, or tried to mend things with your family? I want to know your thoughts. Comment below and share your opinion. If you enjoy inspiring stories of courage and self-respect, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.